I'm Dr. Joseph Cleveland, and I am currently the Frederick and Carol Grover Endowed Chair in Surgery at the University of Colorado Anschutz Medical Center, and also a very proud volunteer in our organization, the STS. And of all my hats I've worn in the STS and continue to wear, my work with the legislative group, Health Affairs Committee, has been some of the most rewarding. This is the 5th year for the STS Legislator of the Year Award, which honors a member of Congress who has a firm legislative record on issues of importance to cardiothoracic surgeons. Normally, we would present our Legislator of the Year award with the award at the STS annual fly-in. However, because of COVID-19, this has prevented us from meeting in person. This year's Legislator of the Year award is Representative Diana DeGette. Representative DeGette has been a champion of STS advocacy priorities during her tenure in the U.S. House of Representatives. She has represented Colorado's 1st congressional district in the House of Representatives since 1997. Noteworthy among her accomplishments are that Representative DeGette serves on the House Committee on Energy and Commerce. She's the chair of the committee's Oversight and Investigation Subcommittee. As a chair, Representative DeGette is responsible for overseeing some of our nation's most important federal agencies, including the Department of Health and Human Services, or HHS. Most noteworthy is that Representative DeGette was the author of the 21st Century Cures Act, which helped modernize the nation's medical research system. STS successfully worked with Representative DeGette to get a definition of clinical data registries included in the Cures Act, which has been most important. For those of us that know Representative DeGette, we know that she's not one to stand still and just rest on her accolades, and therefore she is preparing a Cures 2.0, a revamp of the 21st Century Cures Act. STS has submitted comments to her office how the STS National Database is driving quality improvement and innovation in cardiothoracic surgery. Representative DeGette has introduced key legislation that reauthorized the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute, which is a key STS advocacy priority last year. She's also been a very strong advocate for e-cigarette and vaping regulations, which we obviously as thoracic surgeons hold very strongly in support of. In September, Representative DeGette signed on to a letter led by Representatives Rogers, Marshall, and Bobby Rush that urged HHS and CMS to use existing regulatory authority to address the inequitable Medicare reimbursement cuts immediately. This letter also raised the alarm on patient access to care and outlined the unprecedented public health and economic challenges that physicians are facing due to COVID-19. As cardiothoracic surgery faces a 9% cut, we greatly appreciate Representative DeGette's efforts to mitigate them. Next, I'd like to introduce and ask Dr. Fred Grover, STS past president, to discuss further STS advocacy and also the very unique and robust relationship he has built with his elected representative, Representative DeGette. Dr. Grover.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm really pleased to be able to do that. And advocacy is so important, and it gives us an opportunity to visit with our legislators, and we do that by going to Washington and also by doing it in our home districts. And this develops interpersonal relationships, and hopefully the goal would be trusting relationships that we trust each other and we work together. And this is how I got involved originally with Diana, although she's also a member of our church and sings in the church choir when she's home on weekends. And she's accused me of grabbing her robe to bend her ear on some legislative issue on her way up the center aisle as they proceed in. But I don't think that's really true. I grab her after the church service. But Diana's a wonderful lady and a great friend. And it's so wonderful to have her as our, the district that we're in, which is the city and county of Denver, as our representative. She's done so much for health. She's a major expert in health, I think in the U.S. House of Representatives, one of the 2 or 3 in the whole, on Capitol Hill, and is respected by the health policy leaders that are into Washington when I talk to them. So. But anyway, that's kind of Diana's and my history. And we had a great time too when the Democratic Convention was here. So I'll quit with that.
Certainly, we'd like to turn it over to Representative DeGette for her remarks. Representative DeGette.
Thank you so much, Joe, and thank you, Fred, and thank you for this beautiful award. My staff brought it over to my house today because since we're not in person to receive it, I'm pretending like I guess the two of you are handing it to me together. So thank you. It's really a great honor for me, and it's especially an honor for me. Many of you know that my daughter Rafaela is now a physician and she's finishing her residency at UCSF. She just called me because she's doing a cardio rotation this month. So for a few moments, I have maybe not a surgeon, but at least she's dealing with the same issues that you deal with, and I know that the issues that all of your members are working on every day. And I've been friends with these two gentlemen for so many years, and especially Fred. Fred doesn't bend my ear while I'm walking down the aisle. He just grabs my robe to say, "I want to talk to you after church." So he's technically right, but you'll be happy to know, as physicians, that at our church we are all following appropriate CDC guidelines. Apparently, unlike our president, and we have suspended the choir. We've suspended the choir for the near future because, as you all know, choral singing has been proven to be one of the super spreader events, and so we don't want to lose any Montview Presbyterian choir members. So we actually have been meeting digitally, and the choir has been performing some pieces digitally. I have not yet had time to do that. Let me just talk for a few minutes about some of the issues that I'm working on. You heard both Joe and Fred talk about my Cures 2.0 bill. I'm doing that along with my friend and wingman, Fred Upton, a Republican from Michigan. Fred and I really, when we worked on 21st Century Cures, it was probably the most important bill that was passed, the substantive bill. Obviously, appropriations are important and all of that, but it was the most important substantive bill of that year. And it was the last major bill that President Obama signed into law. And what this bill was really intended to do was to revise the way we do research at the National Institutes of Health, and then the way we do drug and device approval at the FDA. We realized after that great success, and after all of the wonderful things that have happened since then, that there were still some areas that we needed to work on. And so earlier this year, we started working on Cures 2.0. And the hope of this bill is that we will build on what we had done before. And so needless to say, we got to work on Cures 2.0, and then COVID hit. So that put us a little bit behind, but we've been working assiduously all spring and summer on this legislation. And it's really designed to cover 6 areas: public health and pandemic preparedness, caregiver integration, patient engagement in healthcare decision-making, diversity in clinical trials, Food and Drug Administration modernization, and I know you're interested in real-world evidence. I can talk more about that if you'd like, and CMS modernization, because it doesn't do you any good to have an extraordinary new drug or medical device, and if CMS won't cover it, then you can't give access to patients. So the real hope of Cures 2.0 is that we will be able to take that into a patient-centered future, that we can really help begin to get these agencies getting the research and getting the cures out to people in a much more efficient and speedy and safe and protective of privacy fashion. To date, we have received over 500 comments on this issue. We've released a concept paper. We're taking all of the comments, and I know your organization has submitted comments as well. And we expect before the end of the year to release a discussion draft of the legislation with the hope that in the next Congress, early in the next Congress, we'll be able to pass the bill. And people think that this is really extraordinary that two members of opposite parties are actually able to work together. But actually, we find in the Energy and Commerce Committee that we do have a lot of joint efforts. And so, for example, another bill that I'm working on with Congressman Larry Bouchon, who's a Republican from Indiana and a physician, and it's called the VALID Act. And what this bill does is it's called the Verifying Accurate Leading Edge IVCT Development. It's really designed to give a framework to the FDA to give them the tools necessary for diagnostics to make sure that they're safe and effective. And then we also have a breakthrough therapy designation for IVCTs that address unmet needs for patients like rare diseases. And so that's a really important bill as well. And that bill, we introduced it on March 5th, 2020, right before we all left town and sequestered ourselves. But we're hoping that maybe in the lame duck or early in the next Congress, we'll be able to pass that piece of legislation. Also, just a couple more issues I want to talk about. A lot of people want to know what we're doing on the COVID-19 response. And of course, you all know that we had in our original bill, $8.3 billion for emergency funds for prevention, preparedness, and response efforts. We also have relaxed some of the telemedicine restrictions, which I think have been enormously helpful for treating patients while we've been in this period. And then we passed a number of other pieces of legislation that gave money for testing and tracing and for PPE. Right now, Nancy Pelosi is in negotiations with Steve Mnuchin, and I believe Chuck Schumer is part of that too. We hope that Mitch McConnell will help with that as well. We passed the HEROES Act in May, which was a very large bill designed to help pass some of these funds for state, local governments, for more testing, for more tracing, and for assistance for individuals and small businesses. And then just last week we passed another bill that would be sort of a scaled back version of that time-wise, but not a depletion of the benefits that we think are so greatly needed. And then lastly, I want to, because I think it was Joe that mentioned it, the reauthorization of PCORI. PCORI is something that I have really felt quite strongly about for a long time. For those of your members who don't know exactly what PCORI is, it's an independent, nonprofit, non-governmental organization that was authorized by Congress in 2010. And what it does is it funds studies that can help patients and caregivers give better informed healthcare decisions. And I reintroduced that bill, a reauthorization of that bill over a year ago, June 2019, along with Congressman Don Beyer. And it reauthorizes PCORI for an additional 10 years. It was included in the end of the year spending package for an additional 10 years. So we're good, everybody. We're good now for another 10 years. And why that's even why would that even be an issue? Some of my colleagues, and not just on the Republican side of the aisle, but even on my side of the aisle, saw PCORI as sort of a pot of money that they could try to take money out for other things. But really trying to give patient-centered outcomes is so important. It really needs to be a robust and well-funded program. So we're glad to see that it was reauthorized. And then I said that was the last thing, except for I do have one more thing, which is Joe also mentioned the Tobacco to 21 Act. And I want to thank the thoracic surgeons for helping me with that, because this is an issue I worked on for years. And in my committee that I chair, the Oversight Committee of the House Energy and Commerce Committee, we had a whole series of hearings over the years about the marketing of tobacco to youths under the age of 21, and how and the terrible health effects that had for the rest of their lives. Well, of course, now we have, through extreme public health efforts and through the support of the thoracic surgeons, we have reduced the amount of teen smoking to historic lows. That's the good news. The bad news is, of course, then the vaping manufacturers started marketing these vaping products. And so again, we've had a huge public health issue with teen vaping increasing. And we are working assiduously to increase the age for vaping to 21, and to make sure also that we ban flavored vaping products which are targeted at use. If there's a silver lining to the COVID crisis, it's that teen vaping seems to have plateaued during the crisis. And part of the reason for that is because of increased awareness by parents of how dangerous vaping is, and the fact that these teenagers are at home where their parents can keep an eye on them. So that's, we all need to keep working to reduce vaping, because all of my experts, including you, tell me how important it is to make vaping the same kind of public health urgency that teen smoking is. So that's what's going on. I will say that I think that the relationship that I've had with Dr. Grover really demonstrates how important it is that doctors have good relationships with their members of Congress and their senators. We rely on you for the scientific information. And even though there are some people in Washington who don't listen to medical information, who don't believe science works, most members of Congress on both sides of the aisle will listen. They care about science. They care about medical information. And who better to give it to them than you? So I urge everybody. I know frequently doctors say to me, oh, I don't like politics. I don't want to get involved in that. But it's really important, because if we don't have science-based legislation, number one, it's a waste of money. But number two, and more importantly, it could really impact patients' health. So thanks for all you do. Thanks again for this beautiful award. And now I think we're going to have a discussion for a little while. So Dr. Cleveland, back to you.
Yes. Well, Diana, thank you again. As always, you're eloquent, and your work with us is genuine. And you couldn't have said any better of why a long-standing relationship is so important, and why we feel that you represent, obviously not just our needs, but the needs of our patients. And that's what we're all here together to do, is take care of people. With that in mind, however, it is obviously, the bottom line is important to cardiothoracic surgeons as it is to everybody right now. And we realize that everybody is, in these really unprecedented times, had to make sacrifices. Some of these questions are submitted by our members, and cardiothoracic surgeons are facing a 9% cut to Medicare reimbursement starting in January 2021, in the middle of a public health emergency. Other surgical specialties and providers are also facing serious cuts at a time where providers are under enormous financial pressure, as to keep even offices open, and continue to employ their staff, etc. These cuts, compounded with the cancellation of elective surgeries, will disproportionately affect surgeons. And how do you think Congress should address this? What measures would you see that might be fair and in trying to address what we think is a disproportionate cut that we've been asked?
Well, I think now during a pandemic, with all of the stressors and pressures that doctors are facing and the changing medical practice, I think now is a very poor time to start imposing just drastic cuts in compensation. And so I think that we really need to look at this in a much more comprehensive way to see what the reasonable reimbursements should be, not just for cardiovascular surgeons, but also for all doctors. And so, as you mentioned, I signed on to a letter with Representatives Rush and Marshall to asking Secretary Azar and CMS Administrator Verma to hold off on just making these cuts and to really look at this instead in the Medicare physician fee schedule, where we can actually take comments from people, where we can listen and see what a reasonable compensation level is.
Thank you. Your work with Congressman Fred Upton, as you mentioned, is I think a highlight again of what citizens want to see, which is bipartisan legislation, people working together, and again, that's another exemplary thing you've done in your career. And as Fred has pointed out, when you read your biography, it's really impressive to see you've walked that walk. You have long-standingly done that. Now that we're on the 21st Century Cures Act, kind of Cures 2.0, what are your goals? You touched on them a little bit, but
Yeah.
What are some specific things that you would like to see coming forth out of Cures 2.0?
Well, so as I mentioned, I say this all the time, and you agree, is disease doesn't just impact Democrats or Republicans or unaffiliated. It impacts everybody, and it impacts every family in this country. And so I mentioned the I think 5 or 6 areas in the bill. Let me drill down a little bit more. The first area is to improve public health and pandemic preparedness by improving our nation's pandemic surveillance and testing capabilities. We realized that when this hit, that despite many years of efforts, we still have huge gaps in their surveillance and testing capabilities. Also supporting my antimicrobial resistance product commercialization and expanding vaccine education and surveillance. These are all areas that we actually have communicated to Chairman Pallone and Speaker Pelosi, because even though they're in Cures 2.0, we believe that we could potentially include some of these in a pandemic relief bill, because all of them, they can apply to all kinds of diseases, but they apply right now. Secondly, we really want to increase access to digital health services and further advance the use of technology to help patients. Third, improve patients' data rights and develop a government-wide approach to collect and use real-time world health data. This is also a big interest of yours. And this was something that we had, now not to disparage the Senate, but everybody in what we say in the House is the Republicans and the Democrats might be in opposition, but the real enemy is the Senate. That's our view in the House. And we had, in 21st Century Cures, we had hoped that the Senate would really work on some of the technology and some of these issues, but they just didn't. They ran out of time. They work on a different time scale than we do, and so what we're trying to do now is see if we can get that kind of coordination across platforms, across agencies, and all at the same time, of course, ensuring security of patient data and privacy for patients. But if we could do that, then we could really expedite biomedical research by being able to aggregate data and being able to get these studies done, and then of course having post-market review of any treatments that we would have. And so we think we will be able to do that in Cures 2.0. We've had some very good conversations with the agencies themselves and also with the stakeholders. Then the next thing we want to do, and I mentioned this in my opening remarks, is modernize CMS to speed up their decision-making process so that we can get faster and more predictable decisions about what therapies they're going to cover. And then finally, expand patient care planning to ensure that patients and families have the full list of treatments they can get and the associated cost with all of them. You know, I know this we all know this in our personal lives, where you know somebody who gets sick and there's no source of information about what the treatments are. It's just catch as catch can searching on the internet. And believe you me, some of the treatments we see touted on the internet are not treatments you would advise your patients to have. So I think that's really another critical area.
If I can follow up on that, maybe, obviously, as you've alluded to, one of the things is modernizing or kind of helping this tension within CMS. And as you know, through the coverage with evidence development, CMS determines Medicare coverage devices, kind of conditioned upon a requirement to track real-world evidence through registry participation. And this was, I think, highlighted absolutely in 2012 with the coverage with evidence development for transcatheter aortic valve replacement, which is a very disruptive, but at the same time for patients, phenomenal technology. And it really highlights how the STS and ACC, two of the largest professional and trusted organizations, could work together with CMS and the FDA to have a registry to be able to track these things. So it seems like CMS has recently signaled a shift away from CEDs and the requirement to track post-market data as a condition of Medicare coverage. Given, however, this role that coverage with evidence development plays, allowing CMS to cover medical innovations, would cures maybe, would you see cures protecting CAED or somehow modifying this? I mean, we obviously understand there's a tension between getting devices out, and we're all for that, but we also don't want to turn this into the Wild West, no pun intended,
Right.
of just all of a sudden stuff hits the market and we have no idea what's going to people, why, what, where. So would cures address at least, or
Yes,
how would you see cures addressing this?
well, this is the conversation that we have been having even since 21st century cures, about how do you make that balance between the Wild West and encouraging new innovations and technologies. So far, real world evidence has mainly been utilized within the FDA to improve pharmacovigilance of approved drugs and also to support label extensions of approved drugs. But we really, we've heard from so many people like you about these valves, about ways to maximize and optimize the use of real world data in the development of new cures. And so what we're looking at is outlining a framework for the collection of consistent and usable real world data, encouraging patients to engage in real world data generation, and looking at ways that other agencies can use real world data. And we, again, I think that if we have clinician-led registries to utilize the real world data, and then of course, as I said, post-market review is critical to see. And if you have all of those, I think if you have really strong requirements in place and post-market and the review, then that eliminates the wild west situation. It really is a balance, and the main thing, drifting off from this issue a little bit, we're dealing with that right now with the vaccine development for COVID, because of course the administration has put into place this Operation Warp Speed, which is extraordinary and unbelievably innovative. I got to tell you, I give Francis Collins and all of his colleagues and at the FDA so much credit for coming up with this framework, because what they've done, they've taken six potential vaccines, all six different approaches, and then what they've done is they've given them money, they've given them oversight through the FDA, and then what they're doing is they're ramping up manufacture even before the approval process. So the hope is that more than one of them will be through the phase 3 trials this fall or early in the new year at some point, and then we won't have to wait, another 6 months to ramp up the manufacture. But the danger of this, of course, is in your haste to come up with vaccines, that you also will cut corners on safety and efficacy. And so this is where, again, I'm the chair of the Oversight Subcommittee, and we've had a whole investigation and a series of hearings. We had the heads of these pharmaceutical companies come in July and talk about their protocols and what they're doing. And then just last week, we had some of the key researchers, both from the government, but for example, I had Scott McClellan, the former head of the FDA, and others talking about warning signs and what we need to look for, because we need to encourage this, but at the same time make sure that it works. We don't want to become Russia, where Putin announced that they were approving the vaccine even before the phase 3 trials had been completed, but he refused to say if he got the vaccine himself. So, that's just not our standards.
No, I agree. That's a very measured response, which is something that I agree. We can continue our discussion because that's an excellent. I do have a question.
Could I make a comment?
Yes,
Yeah.
Go ahead, Fred. And then I've got a question from somebody. Go ahead, Fred.
Diana, what you're talking about here too is so important. It's post-market surveillance.
Yes.
And with the TAVRs, transcatheter valves, if you didn't, as a physician or a group of physicians, the team, enter the data, you didn't get reimbursed. Medicare was very tough about this.
Right.
And for that reason, we had tremendous, obviously, compliance with doing that. But that's so important because when you're doing the pre-testing of these things before you release them to the real world, there can be differences, and not just early on, but even later.
Well, and some of these new therapies, whether it's a drug or a device, are so complex that even if you didn't have even if you had all the rigor that we have now, none of the shortcuts, you still need the post-market review, because we've had some of these therapies fail, and it's taken kind of a massive failure to be able to realize that it didn't work. So the post-market review is what really helps put the insurance policy on it, so to speak.
Thank you.
So I do have a question from STS member Tom McGillivray, a cardiac surgeon in Houston and member of Executive Council. Dr. McGillivray asks, thank you, Representative DeGette, for all you and the other legislators. And I'm sorry, I'm squinting a little bit because it's in a chat box like this. It's testing my visual. But thank you for all you and other legislators are doing to help us care for our patients. We are very worried that the proposed CMS cuts in healthcare funding will drastically limit access to life-saving care for many of our patients. Is it possible to convince CMS that our patients will, quote, pay the price with decreased access from decreased CMS funding?
Well, this is what we've been trying to talk to Administrator Verma about, is that the solution to whatever issue she's seeing is not to decrease funding, but rather to target funding and to make sure that the ability to approve these treatments. So yeah, I mean, in fact, I was supposed to have a phone call with her a couple of weeks ago, and she postponed it. I think that my wonderful staff, Sherry Lou Santos, is on this call. So Sherry Lou, we should get that back on our schedule to tell them to talk to her about that.
Excellent. Well, let me ask one other thing you touched on too, which is you touched on telemedicine access as part of the Cures 2.0. And I know, obviously we can't ask you to write kind of a just promissory note or a forthgoing check, but that is one of the, I guess, silver linings that we as clinicians have seen coming from COVID too. And particularly, you represent a large, district in City and County Denver, but even within City and County Denver, I've noticed that patients like televisits. They like, being able to not have to wait for the doctor. Sometimes, it does cut down some of the inefficiencies, I guess, sometimes in our system. So given that at least to date, CMS has now kind of said we're going to go forward with this, but not indefinitely. How would you see Congress perhaps influencing CMS to, again, try to encourage us to continue this? Because I think this is something that might come that we should have been doing for many years, but just have not because of the reimbursements for telemedicine.
Yeah, well, it was the reimbursements, and then there were issues about telemedicine across state lines and the
Right.
different medical board requirements, and there were a lot of issues, but necessity is often the mother of invention. And so there was money in that CARES Act that we passed in March for telemedicine. And I have found all the doctors I've talked to have been doing telemedicine. My daughter, for example, she's in internal medicine, and she basically went almost exclusively to telemedicine for months and months, and the patients did love it. Now, you can't do everything by telemedicine, but surely you can do more than we were doing before. And so, in our concept paper for Cures 2.0, we have a jumpstart for telemedicine, and I think this is going to be. We would really welcome your input on that, because again, you need to make sure that you don't go overboard and start doing. You cannot do your whole practice by telemedicine. I'm a lay person, and even I know that. But I think there's a real role for increased telemedicine, and I think that may be, again, a silver lining of COVID is to make us realize that there's a lot more we can do, and it's more convenient for the patients, and it's just as effective for their health. If patients actually will show up at their telemedicine appointments, then that's a huge step forward.
No, I couldn't agree with you more, and particularly, in our line of work where occasionally, it's not unheard of, again, for me to operate on somebody from Montrose, et cetera, and try to arrange post-op follow-up, but I can now see them, now it's virtual, but it is much, again, we get those follow-ups rather than them having to face a 4-hour drive to have the, 15, 20-minute follow-up and them question the value of that. So that's great. Fred, do you have other questions that you have you have from Representative DeGette's remarks?
I think we've pretty well covered it, Diana. So when do you expect the second bill, second version of Cures to come out?
So we expect our discussion draft to come out. We're hoping by the end of the year. Our staffs are working very hard on that. We've taken in all the comments. I think the reason 21st Century Cures was so successful is because we worked with all of the stakeholders. We worked with the doctors, we worked with the patients, we worked with the disease advocacy groups, the agencies themselves, the angel investors, everybody. And I think that was successful. And so that's what we've been doing here. So our discussion draft, we're hoping to release by the end of the year. And then we're hoping to be able to have a final bill early in the next Congress. I think it'll be, now we met with some, not resistance, but with some concern about the size of 21st Century Cures. And it took us a long time to work that through Congress last time. Now, I will tell you, I'm so proud because people really see 21st Century Cures as a paragon of how legislation should be, and even now when we'll have a hearing on something, that then agency folks or others will come in and say, oh, well, we were able to do this because of 21st Century Cures. Oh, well, we did that. And so I think it'll be easier to pass Cures 2.0 than it was 21st Century Cures. And I think it'll be on a fairly, we're going to have a lot of work to do next year, so it probably won't be the first bill up, but I think I have great hope that we can get it done in the spring, summer next year.
Great.
That's great. I have one more. I guess I apologize. It's brief, but how about just a brief, your perspective of how things are with the COVID relief legislation right now, and where do you think that's going?
Well, I just talked to the speaker about this on Saturday, 2 days ago, and we have been I'll be honest, the Democrats and many of our Republican colleagues in the House have been sort of mystified why Mitch McConnell just wouldn't have conversations about a new relief package. I still have tens of thousands of constituents who are unemployed, who are in the service industry or in industries where these are just not coming back anytime soon. And if you think about restaurant employees and gig workers, so these are people who have been living on just a few $100s a week ever since the first relief package ran out. And then you think about the state and local governments and the hits that they've had to take to their budgets. And of course, in Colorado, we have a constitutional amendment that we can't deficit spend. So the state budget and the local budgets are draconian for this next fiscal year. So and then of course, all of the experts are saying, and you're already seeing it already, a fall increase in COVID and an increase through the fall and winter. And so we know we're going to need PPE. We know we're going to need ventilators and hospital beds, and we're going to have these expenses. So we've been, I mean, as I said, the House passed the HEROES Act in May. Nancy Pelosi has been trying to negotiate. So just Saturday, she said that Mnuchin now realizes that he needs to do something, even if it's scaled back, to get us through the end of the year. And I really hope, for the sake of my constituents, that we can do it. We're having phone calls in my office, in my Denver office, of people saying, I can't afford to buy food. Now, that's just inexcusable. So I think we have to do something, and I'm hoping in the next few weeks, who knows, maybe the president will now realize that this is real, now that he's gotten it, and maybe he'll tell Mnuchin to make a deal. I don't know, but I think it's been frustrating. I'll just be honest, it's been frustrating.
I understand. We can only hope that
Yeah, I know.
maybe the executive branch will have I can't think of what I want to say correctly, but a new realization of what this means.
Yeah, I would hope so, because this isn't politics, this is people's lives.
Right, absolutely. Well, Fred, I want to thank again Representative DeGette and all our attendees for participating. You are truly one of our most valued legislators. We appreciate everything you do and have done, not just for us, but for the House of Medicine, for our patients, and obviously here in Colorado for the 1st District too as well.
Well, thanks.
You
and
are
thanks again for this beauty. You can't see how beautiful this award is actually there.
That's
but
fantastic.
It's really beautiful. Thanks. And I can put it right here in my study to keep me company now that I'm most of my awards are in my office in DC or in my office in Denver, but now I can have this award right here that I can see it while I'm working remotely as advised by the CDC and the House physicians. So thank you so much again. I appreciate it. And thanks to everybody for being on this Zoom chat. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Good evening, everybody.
See you online in church, Fred.
All right. At least there he can't run down and grab you by the robe. We'll have to chat.
No, but he can push his little icon though.
All righty.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Goodbye.